Good evening. I'm Paul Fredette, and with me here is Karen Fredette, my wife. Together, we minister to solitaries and hermits throughout the world through Ravensbread Ministries, right here from our home in the mountains of western North Carolina. If you're joining us for the first time this evening, we want to say welcome, and we want to thank all those friends of ours who have returned for another reflection session on the eremitic life, its vocation, its features, other aspects that surround this very strange but very beautiful calling. In last week's presentation, we somewhat turned our focus from looking at the whole phenomena of the resurgence of eremitic life in the past 75 years, at least in the Western world, and began to shift our focus toward the future. What lies ahead? Is there actually a future? We mentioned how Richard Rohr tended to look at the Beatitudes as a framework, a construct for the second half of a Christian life, as opposed to, or maybe not as opposed to, but in distinction from the construct for the first half of life, which for most everybody is the Ten Commandments. Nevertheless, the commandments are the container, the content Jesus explicated in the Sermon on the Mount and has come down to us known as the Beatitudes. And it becomes the focus, the matter, if you will, of the second half of life. Not only for Christians, because the values that are espoused in the Beatitudes are basic human values that make a life authentic and worth living. For more than 75 years now, eremitic life has steadily but silently grown in the Western world. It's affected many continents and countries and their cultures. We ask, who's preaching it? What institutions or agencies are advertising this? None that we know of. Why then are otherwise normal individuals in increasing numbers seeking a lifestyle that's defined by silence and solitude? Really, what are those people doing out there? Something's happening. It's transcending all the language barriers, all of the denominations, all of the religious and spiritual traditions. No one knows precisely the number, nor can all hermits and religious solitaries be identified. But at the same time, no one can deny that their numbers are increasing. And our ministry to Ravensbread over the past 17 years testifies to this phenomena throughout the world.
We might talk about growth in numbers, and it might sound like we're talking about something that you could call popularity. But that's not what hermit life is about.
Definitely not.
Anyone who takes her eremitic life seriously actually is bound to feel rather helpless and impotent, in fact, because you're only one person. Although, as a hermit, you have your heart open to the world, yet you know that as a single individual, what positive difference can you possibly make? What can one person do, hidden or alone? Even prayer can't be seen as a form of influence or power. When we're talking about hermit life, we're talking about people who are living the Beatitudes, as Paul said. We're looking at the beatitude of the poor in spirit, particularly. And what does that mean? What does it mean that one has no way to make an effect on the world? No way even to join with others to become an influential group. In fact, instead of feeling proud or pleased with what one is doing, many hermits, serious ones, feel almost blameworthy that their lifestyle in a way shields them from the havoc, from the suffering that happens throughout the world. And their lives seem sheltered from their brothers and sisters. Love and compassion well up, but how is that enough? Can you just love these people, and will that be not enough? What should you be doing? And as we said before, it's not a matter of doing, and especially not a matter of having influence over the world. We cannot even think of prayer as a means of power of any kind.
Or control. But certainly not controlling God.
No. And some people rather can begin to think that they do influence God in some way. And if you've been living a life of prayer for very long, you know that is far from true. It is a means of, it's a choice of weakness, actually. It's a choice of not having power. One of the people that we think of when we hear of the poor in spirit, we think of Francis of Assisi, the little poor man, as he was known. And for him, poverty had very little to do with money. It was an attitude, a sense of being the little one in the world. Occasionally, when he would gather his brothers around him, some thoughts would well up, and he would share them with them. He made he called it an admonition, a reminder. And when he knew that these were truly coming from God, he would ask one of the brothers, probably Brother Leo, to write it down for him. And as a result, we have a number of Francis' own words, his own admonitions. And he gave one, speaking of the poverty of spirit. He said this: there are many who, applying themselves insistently to prayer and good deeds, engage in much abstinence and many mortifications of their bodies, yet they are put out, they are scandalized, and quickly roused to anger if someone says anything against them. In other words, they are valuing themselves higher than they are valuing God or other people. Other people's opinions upset them because the center of their world is themselves.
Mm-hmm.
When what a truly poor in spirit person is someone who focuses outwardly on others and on God. Francis says, yes.
Oftentimes, isn't it? Sometimes people get the idea that when we talk about poor in spirit, They were talking about negating oneself, that we're putting ourselves down. It's not a matter of putting ourselves down or of thinking ill of ourselves. It's a matter of not thinking about ourselves. The world wants us to think, our culture, our society wants us to think that it's about us, but it's not about us. And the hermit, the religious solitary, those who are in this way of life for any length of time, soon realize that deep truth. It's not about you.
And that is what the poor in spirit truly are. As Francis would say, the persons who do focus on themselves are not poor in spirit, because the poor in spirit truly do not think of themselves. And they actually love those who would, as it were, strike them by putting them down, either in words or in an attitude towards them. So what do they do? This is where passionate intercessory prayer and supplication spontaneously arise, when you feel totally helpless.
The challenge is to live a life given over to praying for others while accepting that one will never or seldom, if ever, see any results. No one in this life will ever to be able to ascertain how or even if all of their devoted prayers are efficacious for other people. In a way, it is a terrible kind of poverty to live dedicated to helping others, yet never knowing what good one might be doing. It's a terrible sort of poverty today, as much as it was for the early desert fathers and mothers, and perhaps more poignantly so, because in the culture and in the society that we live in, where acquisition, possession, and consumption sort of form the bedrock, the foundation for all the activity and the interrelations that are going on, well, what comes out of such a foundation? There's an emphasis on personal recognition. Being anonymous is not a value. Status, acquiring a certain amount of status in life, whether that's in one's employment or one's social circles, having a list of achievements that one can display. Who, after all, in this day and age, wants to be an underachiever? Think of when a child is called an underachiever in school, and then just think when people grow up and they're known as chronic underachievers. Everybody wants to do something significant and be significant. Whether it's the accomplishments they have lead to either celebrity, which is such a rage today, and if not celebrity, at least notoriety. The 15 minutes of fame now has become what? 30 seconds of fame in the news or the social media? And yet, what we're looking at is that a culture has taught us to keep the focus, to keep the spotlight on ourselves. that it's about us. It's about our accomplishments, our recognition, our achievements, our satisfaction. All of that is diametrically opposed to poverty of spirit. Not that any of those things are bad, but it's just that the focus has to be taken and turned towards God and others. That's what poverty of spirit is all about. Believers among hermits and religious solitaries leave all the results to God's mercy, and others will rely on their own convictions, whatever they might be, about the interconnectivity of all human beings, trusting that what affects one, what touches one, affects all and touches the whole. This is the form of intercession that's expressed less by words than by a way of life.
And this is what the hermit does, but doesn't seek to measure how well that way of life is going.
One of the most celebrated hermits, if you want to use that term, was Thomas Merton. And even he struggled with this poverty of spirit in his life. And in his biography, John Howard Griffin uses excerpts from Merton's own personal journal and gives a beautiful example of this. The occasion is Thomas Merton's decision not to attend an international conference. Where exactly this conference was scheduled to be, I don't know. It doesn't say right here. But these are the little bit of the entry that Thomas Merton made and illustrates what we've just been talking about so well. Merton is at the point where he's fairly confident that he will not receive permission to attend, but also he's not even sure he wants to go. So he says, quote, "No, I would be scared of simply making a fool of myself and accomplishing nothing. There is no question that my 25 years in here have, for better or worse, left me entirely outside the age of traveling by jet to conferences everywhere. I just do not belong anymore to that world. Maybe I should belong in it. Maybe I've made a mistake. I don't know. But the fact is that I belong in these woods. So too in my writing. My persistent desire to be somebody, which is really stupid. I know I don't really need it or want it, and yet I keep going after it. Not that I should stop writing or publishing, but I should not let myself be flattered and cajoled into the business, letting myself be used, making statements and declarations, quote unquote, being there or appearing. It shames me." At the root, though, he admitted an attraction for this kind of publicity. Or rather, he would like to be known and loved and admired, yet, quote, "not in this cheap or silly way." But he asks, is there any other way? In any case, if I were more serious about remaining unknown, I would not be so quick to accept what eventually makes me ashamed. Isn't that telling from a man as immersed in the life of a solitary as Thomas Merton?
It is also an example of the profound honesty
Mm-hmm.
that the hermit acquires by living intently that lifestyle. A Camaldolese monk once wrote, "Prayer is not only speaking to God on behalf of humanity, it is also paying for humanity." In other words, you can't just have a comfortable life of prayer. There is suffering involved, and there should be.
Like
So
Bonhoeffer talked about cheap grace.
it isn't.
Yeah.
It isn't cheap. And it is paid for by some. And we don't know which ones. And that's the hidden hermits. One of the most acute forms of suffering is to never know whether or not one's chosen lifestyle is at all worthwhile or has any value for others. And the kind of suffering that they were talking about is the kind that St. Paul wrote of several thousand years ago, and which still speaks to us so plainly today of what the poor in spirit and the truly Christian holy person is meant to be. First of all, he said, God said, "Let light shine out of darkness." And he has shown in our hearts that we in turn might make known the glory of God shining on the face of Christ. This treasure is possessed in earthen vessels to make it clear that its surpassing power comes from God and not from us. We are afflicted in every way possible, but we are not crushed. We are full of doubts, but we never despair. We are persecuted, but never destroyed. For continually we carry about in our bodies the dying of Jesus, so that in our bodies the life of Jesus may be revealed. While we live, we are constantly being delivered to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus may be revealed in our mortal flesh. Death is at work in us, so that life may be in you. And we have the Spirit that is spoken of in Scripture. We believe, and so we speak. We do not lose heart, Paul goes on, because our inner being is renewed each day, even though our body is being destroyed at the same time. The present burden of our trial is light enough and earns for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. Why? Because we do not fix our gaze on what is seen, but on what is unseen. What is seen is transitory. What is unseen lasts forever. And this is the hermit's genuine poverty of spirit. They enter into the darkness, the dusky cloud of unknowing that hermits of past ages have mentioned. And they walk beyond that light into the darkness, trusting that they are being led, and often, unbeknownst even to themselves, they have actually become beacons of light for others.
What we do know is this, that numbers reveal very little when one's dealing with a movement that spiritually links like-minded people around the globe, from New Zealand to Ireland, from India to Canada. How do you begin to even think of measuring the prophetic power rooted in contemplation and compassion? A creative vision that transcends disparate cultures and traditions. Commonly held goals unify these people who seldom, if ever, actually meet one another, even though they are acutely aware of one another. As editors of Ravensbread, Karen and I, over the past 17 years, have had the great privilege of communicating with literally hundreds of hermits and solitaries. And we've discovered one thing which both sets them apart and unites them, and that is a marvelous freedom and a joy, especially a joy born of poverty of spirit.
When we speak of joy, again, we think of St. Francis of Assisi. When I entered the monastery as a poor clerk, my novice mistress didn't spend a lot of time telling us anecdotes from the life of St. Francis. Mainly, she just said to us, Franciscan spirituality is a spirituality of joy. Where does that joy come from? She didn't spend a lot of time telling us the answer to that question either. That was left for each one of us to find out for ourselves. And through the years, many of us found that the root of that joy is to be able to live without care. We're not talking about, like we said before, without caring. We're talking about not having cares about things in our lives which weigh us down.
Worries and anxieties.
Worries and anxieties that just keep us awake at night, which make us wonder where the next meal will come from. If we learn to live a truly carefree life, everything that we really need is provided for us. And we discover with a certain amount of joy that we really don't need nearly as much as we thought we might. I know when I was living in West Virginia as a hermit, I had this little cabin that I moved into. And I was sitting there one day. I just moved in, and I was looking across the room and realized that there was light shining through the wall, but it was a wall that had no windows. And I realized that it was also a wall that had no insulation. And because I had no money, I realized that I was going to have to learn to live without insulation. And I accepted that. But apparently, my God thought otherwise, because he sent my cousins, who were builders, down to see my cabin. They took one look at that wall and they said, we can do something about that. And they came back in a few weeks with several rolls of insulation and some roofing paper, and I could no longer see through that wall. But the point that we're trying to make is that we should be able to find joy in what we have and in what we don't have. And as we learn to do that, we acquire an attitude which I think comes as close to living in heaven on earth as we can ever be. And that attitude, that feeling, is contentment.
Mm-hmm.
One is satisfied. One is not looking for more. And that contentment can wrap one around like a warm blanket. And one know that you are held, that you are loved, and it is enough.
And I guess part of it is that contentment is something that is impervious to whether or not you can see through the wall or not. It's not so much that our contentment or the joy is reactive to either what we do have or what we don't have, but that it just transcends that completely. The contentment is unaffected by what we have or what we don't. St. Clare is reputed to have said, when someone remarked about their being given, that the monastery had been given some wine, and was it permissible to drink the wine? She said, when there's wine, we'll drink wine. When there is no wine, we'll drink water. It had nothing to do with, the joy was beyond that. It didn't emanate from, it wasn't caused by either having something or not having something. And whether that something is simply material goods, or whether it's one's reputation, or one's satisfaction, or one's safety, that joy can't be touched by those things either coming or going.
We talk about the poverty of spirit, and I have seen people make themselves totally miserable by trying to live holy poverty. And they can become uptight.
And make others miserable as well.
Oh, they're good at that. They become very uptight because someone gave them something that wasn't appropriate. Holy poverty wouldn't permit them to have it. In fact, one of those types of people came down to my hermitage in West Virginia, and a friend had given me a microwave, a little microwave, which was sitting on my kitchen counter. And this lady looked at that, and she thought, she was truly scandalized. This was not what a holy hermit should have in her hermitage. And I just let her think what she thought. I knew that it was a gift given to me. It was one I could truly use, and I thanked God for it.
In our Western Hemisphere, the word meditation usually evokes the idea of a journey inward toward the divine. It suggests a spirituality, oftentimes, that is a flight from the world toward a more self-absorbed or self-centered existence where only oneself and God are the dominant players. But the spirituality that one would find in a hermitage, Karen and I would suggest, would be vastly different. Contrary to common opinion, those who spend long periods of time in solitude learn how to celebrate togetherness. They also develop a compassionate caring for the least, as well as for those who consider themselves great. The hermit embraces all and judges no one. No one is greater or lesser, holier or sinful in the view of the solitary, because as one who is poor in spirit, they are not in a position to condemn anyone.
They've given up the burden of judging others. And you don't realize what a heavy burden that is until you begin to realize what you're doing. When you're looking at people and feeling an obligation to decide or judge, are they what they should be? And if they're not, do I have a responsibility?
Mm-hmm.
No, we don't have to carry that. That's another burden that the poor in spirit do not carry.
Actually, they develop a humility along the way that prevents them from looking down on others. When we think of looking down upon others, and then we think about the whole notion of understanding others, understanding literally means standing under. And from that position of standing under, the only direction to look is up. One cannot look down. From such a position, it's impossible to look anywhere but up. From that point, from that vantage point, hermits can exercise a generous compassion. Rich Heffron, who wrote a study not too long ago on the Beatitudes, talked about poverty of spirit and the kingdom of heaven, and he did it and used a beautiful illustration that we would like to share with you this evening. It's a story that was told by the poet, the Russian poet, Yevgeny Yevtushenko, and that gives us a glimpse of the sudden appearance of the kingdom of heaven. The year is 1944, and Yevtushenko's mother had taken him from Siberia to Moscow. They were in a huge crowd that witnessed a procession of 20,000 German prisoners of war being marched across Red Square. Yevtushenko recalls this event in his autobiography and says, "The pavements swarmed with onlookers, cordoned off by soldiers and police. The crowd was mostly women, Russian women, with hands roughened by hard work, excuse me, lips untouched by lipstick, and with thin hunched shoulders which had borne half the burden of the war. Every one of them must have had a father or a husband, a brother or a son that had been killed by the Germans. They gazed with hatred in the direction from which the column was to appear. And at last," he says, "we saw it. The generals marched at the head, massive chins stuck out, lips folded disdainfully, their whole demeanor meant to show superiority over their plebeian victors. Someone from the crowd shouted, 'They smell of perfume, the bastards.' The women were clenching their fists. The soldiers and the policemen had all they could do to hold them back. And then all at once, something happened to them. They saw German soldiers, thin, unshaven, wearing dirty, blood-stained bandages, hobbling on crutches or leaning on the shoulders of their comrades. The soldiers walked with their heads down. The street became dead silent. The only sound was the shuffling of boots and the thumping of crutches." Yevtushenko goes on to say, "Then I saw an elderly woman in broken-down boots push herself forward and touch a policeman's shoulder, saying, 'Let me through.' There must have been something about her which made him step aside. She went up to the column, took from inside her coat something wrapped in a colored handkerchief, and unfolded it. It was a crust of black bread. She pushed it awkwardly into the pocket of a soldier, so exhausted that he was tottering on his feet. And now, from every side, women were running toward the soldiers, pushing into their hands bread, cigarettes, whatever they had. The soldiers were no longer enemies. They were people. This is the sort of story that most history books pass over. Miraculous moments when enmity is replaced by mercy and compassion opens the way to actions of healing and forgiveness. And plain poverty becomes poverty of the spirit.
What Francis would call holy poverty. Hermits can be alone in the desert, or they can be anonymous among a crowd on a subway. No one will ever notice them, but everyone is touched by them. Their joyous freedom, their poverty of spirit radiates peace. And people may not know where the wave of peace or gentleness comes from, but they are touched by it. The kindly compassion of the true solitary silently announces that heavenly gifts are present, mysteriously touching others, bringing freedom from fear. Fear, which Thomas Merton said, is the root of all war. And because these are the poor in spirit, and they have nothing to lose, the kingdom of heaven is already theirs.
Friends, let's take the remainder of our time together now and bless our prayer time. We bless the light in the name of the one who creates life, in the name of the Savior who loves life, in the name of the Spirit who is the fire of life.
Since we've been talking rather frequently of Francis during this gathering this evening, I would like to share with you one of his most beloved prayers, known by many names, but mainly by the Canticle of the Spirit, or the Canticle of Brother Sun. O Most High, Almighty good Lord God, to Thee belong praise, glory, honor, and all blessing. Praised be my Lord God with all his creatures, and especially our brother the sun, who brings us the day and who brings us the light. Fair is he, and he shines with a very great splendor. O Lord, he signifies thee to us. Praised be my Lord for our sister the moon, and for the stars, the which he has set clear and precious and lovely in the heavens. Praised be my Lord for our brother the wind, and for air and clouds, calms and all weather, by which thou upholdest life and all creatures. Praised be my Lord for our sister water, who is very serviceable to us, and humble, and precious, and clean. Praised be my Lord for our brother fire, through whom thou givest us light in the darkness, and he is bright and pleasant, merry, mighty, and strong. Praised be my Lord for our mother the earth, the which doth sustain us and keep us, and bringeth forth divers fruits and flowers of many colors, and grass. This was the end of Francis' canticle when he first sang it to his brothers. He was very ill at the time, and had spent a very restless night in the little cabin in the garden at the monastery where Clare lived. And in the morning he called his brothers to him, and he said he had been visited by the Spirit during the night, and now all pain and sorrow was lifted from him, and he sang for them and for his sister Clare this song of the brothers and sisters of the world. Then he heard that the bishop and the mayor of Assisi were at each other's throats, as it were. The bishop was so angry that he had declared an interdict on anyone who had dealings with the mayor. The mayor was so incensed with the bishop's attitude that he declared that anybody who had any affairs to do with the bishop would be put in jail. The whole city was in turmoil, and it broke Francis' heart. So he called a few of his brothers to him and said, "Go into the city, call the bishop and the mayor into the main square, sing to them my song of the flowers and the sun, and add this verse: Praised be my Lord for all those who pardon one another for love's sake, and who endure weakness and tribulation. Blessed are they who peacefully will endure, for thou, O Most High, will give them a crown." They said that both the bishop and the mayor began to weep. They went over to one another and fell on each other's necks and kissed one another and asked pardon, each claiming that they were the one to start the problems in the city. The final verse that Francis added to his canticle was after he had been seen by his doctor, and he had asked him, "Please, tell me truly, for I am not afraid. Do I have very long to live now?" And the doctor said, "No, Francis, you probably only have a few more days." And Francis wrote the final verse of his canticle: "Praised be my Lord for our sister, the death of the body, from which no one escapes. Woe to those who die in mortal sin. Blessed are those who die in thy most holy will, for the second death shall have no power to do them harm. Praise ye and bless the Lord, and give thanks to him, and serve him with great humility." Francis had his brothers sing this song to him on the day he was dying, when he became most aware that we are earth, and unto earth we shall return.
And St. Paul says, we have, as Karen quoted earlier this evening, we have this treasure, the treasure of God's own life, in this, an earthen vessel. We are the earthen vessels. We'd like you to hear John Foley's rendition of this beautiful song this evening as part of our meditation.
We hold a treasure not made of gold, in earthen vessels, wealth untold. One treasure only, the Lord, the Christ, in earthen vessels. Light has shone in our darkness, God has shone in our heart, with the light of the glory of Jesus the Lord. one treasure only, the Lord, the Christ, in earthen vessel. He has chosen the lowly, who are small in this world. In his weakness is glory, in Jesus the Lord. We hold a treasure not made of gold, in earthen vessels well untold. One treasure only, the Lord, the Christ, in earthen vessel.
Our scriptural reflection this evening is taken from the first letter of Peter. May grace and peace be yours in abundance. And may you live in a spirit of unity together, with sympathy, love, tender hearts, and humble minds. Do not repay evil for evil, or abuse for abuse. Instead, repay wrong with acts of grace. As the scriptures say, turn away from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of God are on those who seek right relationships, and the face of God is against those who do wrong. Even if you suffer for doing right, you are blessed, for that is what Christ did in bringing us to God. He was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit. So if Christ suffered physically, we also should be prepared to suffer. Be strong in your love for one another. Be generous without complaining. Serve one another with the gifts that you have been given. And when you speak, let your words be words of love. In this way, God will be honored in everything that you do. Now, in the silence of our hearts, or in whatever other way we may be moved, let's give thanks for this day that has been and pray for the life of the world. Thanks be to you, O God, for the night and its light, for the stars that emerge in the evening sky, and the white moon's radiance. Thanks be to you for the earth's unfolding of color and the bright sheen of creatures from ocean depths. In the darkness of the world and in the night of our own souls, let us be looking with longing for light. Let us be looking in hope. May the grace of the night's stillness be ours. May the grace of the moon's guidance be ours. May the grace of heaven's vastness be ours. To renew our souls this night in sleep, to enlighten our dreams in the night, and to open our spirits to eternity, until the angels of light awaken us, until the morning angels awaken us. Once again, we thank you all for joining with us this evening. Karen and I so deeply appreciate this time that we can spend with you. We want to remind you that if you do want to get in touch with us with any comments on the presentations thus far or any questions, whatever, we can be reached by email at pkfredette@frontier.com, or you can visit us on our website at ravensbreadministries, all one word, .com, and there's a contact us page where you can contact us through the website itself. Again, we want to thank all of those who have given so generously of their time and their effort to help us in making these presentations possible. Certainly we appreciate Brother Sean and all the ministry of the group there at the UK. Again, we say thank you, God bless you, and good night. The blessings of heaven, the blessings of earth, the blessings of sea and of sky, on those we love this night, and on every human family, the gifts of heaven, the gifts of earth, the gifts of sea and sky.